Well, Ashwin, thank you for your time today. I'm delighted to have you. Maybe we could start by just getting you to share a little bit around your experiences and what do you do with Checkpoint?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. I have been with Checkpoint now for some 10 years. And in my current role, I think if I have to summarize, so the current role is a cybersecurity evangelist. And I think if I had to summarize it, I would say that I help people make smart cybersecurity decisions. That's what I do.
Excellent. You talk about cybersecurity there, and it sounds like a simple question, but it might have a complex answer. Mm-hmm. But tell us a little bit about how does cybersecurity work?
Sure. So cybersecurity, I suppose the objective of cybersecurity is to prevent or minimize harm or damage to IT systems. But if you step back and really think about it, cybersecurity is it's really all about protecting organizations and people and individuals. This is typically done through designing of networks with tools and technology that's used to protect against cyber attacks or cyber threats. And today we see cyber attacks against small businesses and large businesses all alike, against their network, against mobile phones, against endpoints, IoT devices, against cloud ecosystems. So as a security vendor, our job is to protect our customers' assets against these cyber attacks.
Okay. And we're seeing a lot of media at the moment. It seems like these threats, these attacks seem to be accelerating. Is that the case?
Correct. Look, cyber threats are always evolving. And if you look at any security report, you'll see year-on-year growth in terms of the number of attacks, the frequency of attacks, and so that is something that's quite consistent. Is that there's definitely a rate of change, and we are seeing more and more sophisticated attacks.
You mentioned sophistication there. Maybe if you could expand a little bit on, what are we seeing in the market?
Okay, sure. So typically, what we find is that most of the sophisticated cyber weapons come from state-sponsored threat actors, and we've seen this in the past as well. And this is typically because state-sponsored attackers, or basically government-backed attackers, are the ones that have very, very deep pockets, and they have access to a lot of very highly skilled people. So typically, they're the ones that will design very, very sophisticated weapons because they can afford to buy cyber weapons as well. They can afford to buy security vulnerabilities or security or zero-day vulnerabilities, which are then leveraged in their tools. And the unfortunate thing for most of us is when these tools leak and are available to your common cyber criminals, to your petty thefts and script kiddies who may not necessarily have the skills to design these weapons, but certainly can use them. And that's what we're seeing.
Okay. It sounds like, cybersecurity as a small business owner is critically important. So maybe, what are your thoughts around how do I improve my, as a business owner, my cybersecurity? How do I reduce my chances of being hacked?
Sure. I think the first thing to understand is that regardless of whether you're a small business owner or a large enterprise, you're a CISO for a large enterprise, there's no single silver bullet here. Cybersecurity is not easy, so there needs to be a little bit of work. One of the things that business can do is look for security frameworks and reference architecture, right? There's no point reinventing the wheel. Some very smart people have already designed and come up with ways and that security should be implemented. So I certainly recommend that you leverage that. Small and medium business owners and those who are responsible for the security need to educate themselves on the current threats and trends. It's really important to know what's actually happening in this space so that you can take the right action. I recommend following best practice. Look at what vendor best practices. So if you're deploying security solution from vendor X, then make sure you know how to deploy their solution in line with best practice. I highly recommend having an incident response plan, right? We see many organizations that either don't have an incident response plan, or if they do, it's never been tested. It's never been validated by a third party. So it's very, very important that you do that, because when you test your incident response plan, you'll very quickly identify if all the key personnel actually understand their roles and responsibility, and if the technology and solutions you have in place actually work. So those are some of the tips. I would also say that you need to have situation awareness. So make sure that you have someone or something. Usually you want something that's automated, that's monitoring your network and it's alerting you. And if possible, you want something that will allow you to automatically remediate some of these threats as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ashwin, you mentioned there, different types of attacks and threats. Maybe share, with everyone, what are some of those threats? What are some of those attacks which, as a small business owner, I may come across?
At the moment, we are seeing a huge increase in coronavirus-related themed cyber attacks. Cyber criminals love these sorts of atmosphere where there's confusion and panic around this pandemic. So we're seeing a lot of phishing attacks. We're seeing cyber criminals attempting to scare people into clicking on links due to face mask shortage or vaccines, those sorts of things. We're seeing cyber criminals really try and leverage these phishing attacks. We've seen them pretend to be the World Health Organization. So we've identified malicious emails that are being sent that were sent from cyber criminals, but it was made to look like it was sent from a World Health Organization. And as soon as you open the attachment, which was supposed to have steps that businesses could take to minimize the risk of COVID-19, as soon as you open those attachments, malware gets downloaded onto your machines, and these malware are basically keyloggers that will then monitor all your keystrokes and send that information back to attackers. So that's just one thing that we're seeing. Another type of attack we're seeing is ransomware. In Australia, over the last, I would say 2 months now, we've seen a steady increase in, not actually a steady, it's about threefold increase in ransomware attacks. And this is based on the work and that Checkpoint Incident Response Team is doing. They're the ones that's telling me that this is the increase that we've seen in the different types of attacks. So again, really, really important to have the right security control. So you want to have things that allow you to, first of all, detect phishing attacks in real time, and you also want to have solutions that can automatically detect a ransomware attack and then automatically remediate that. So there's no user intervention. Yep. Those tools exist, they are effective, and they are available. So don't fall victim to ransomware. You don't need to.
Okay. So just take me through, you talk about a lot of, potential attacks, threats there. It sounds quite complex. I'm a really small business. I don't have an IT department. How do I get started in this piece around, protecting my business when I've got all of this going on?
Sure. So the fact is that you do need sophisticated tools to defend against these. The good news is that you can have a lot of these security controls all in a nice compact box or appliance these days. So those solutions that are deployed within the large enterprise are also available for small and medium-sized businesses. And today it's very, very easy to deploy these types of solutions. The same thing applies for mobile phone solutions. Same thing applies for endpoint solutions, right? So one of the things I would recommend is look at consolidating this. So there's no point having a security solution from 5 different vendors. That's just going to create unnecessary headache. Go in, pick one security vendor, stick to them, and hopefully they can protect you against everything.
Okay, excellent. Look, and finally, I just want to ask a question about mobility in particular, and you mentioned that a little bit before. Reading a number of articles recently where it appears that the level of cybersecurity or attacks and threats through mobile devices is increasing. Tell us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. Look, the first misconception I think I want to address here is that there's this belief in the community that for some reason Apple iOS phones are more secure than Android phones. Well, first of all, let me tell you that's not true. We've seen attacks on both, successful attacks on both. So that's the first thing, right? Don't have that false sense that just because you've got an iOS phone that you're secure. And at the end of the day, these phones are software. So there's software codes written, so they have vulnerabilities in it. The types of attacks that we've seen, the predominant attacks are malicious applications. These are applications that will leverage the fact that as soon as you install these applications, it pops up with messages, and most people, what do? They just blindly accept and allow the application unlimited access to the device. And then these devices are able to find your geolocation and send that information to attackers. They're able to use the phone to spy on you, your speakers. They're able to capture screenshots. They're able to capture your username, your password, all of this information. Attackers are able to carry out espionage campaign using malicious applications on phones as well. One of the concerns that we have is attackers also target little children. So it's very important that you have some sort of mobile threat prevention solution for your mobile phone that identifies these sorts of malicious applications and then lets you know so you can remove it. Or if you're a business, hopefully you've got a solution that will automatically remediate that for you.
And over the last few months, there's been a number of high-level issues raised through the press. In actual fact, our Prime Minister spoke quite candidly about potential impacts. I understand Checkpoint played a major role in some of those pieces. So maybe you could just share a little bit around that. Certainly.
So it was actually late last year when our incident response team, working with another government in Asia, identified a malicious email being sent to a state government here in Australia. And that then kickstarted a whole different investigation. And what we found is that there was a threat campaign that's been going on for many years in the Asia Pacific region. And this particular threat campaign, based on the tools, the techniques, and the target that they have, we believe is a state-sponsored attack. And so we've actually published all of our findings online, so with all the indicators. So all the government agencies can consume those indicators and make sure that they are able to identify this particular threat.
Okay, so Checkpoint have been a leader in security for quite a number of years, dating back into the 1990s. With COVID, our world has changed so dramatically. In what we're finding, a lot of customers, inquiring about how do they set up working from home, and as we've needed to do so, I guess, for you, I'm interested in, how do we help our customers around maintaining and having the right cybersecurity protection in place?
Sure. So I think we've seen many businesses now rush to try and provide employees remote access due to the pandemic, right? And in doing so, businesses have tried to open up services such as email for remote users, but they've ended up exposing email systems to the outside in a way that has allowed them to be compromised. In many cases, this is due to just poor network security, or because they just haven't patched their system. So that's just something, a trend that we've seen as a result of this pandemic. Now, in terms of what are some of the precautions that remote access users should take, I think it's really important to use remote access solutions such as VPN. To make sure that your communication is encrypted between the office and the remote user. Make sure that all your endpoints, all your mobile phone devices, these things are all up to date, and it can deal with the latest threat. So endpoints must be able to protect against ransomware activity, something that we've seen a 3-fold increase in the last couple of months. Make sure that your employees, if they are accessing corporate or business data, or they're carrying out any business process on their mobile phones, then it needs to have the security for your mobile phone. We also would recommend that be very, very careful. Let your employees know to be very careful when it comes to emails, not to blindly just open emails from unknown senders, especially if it prompts a certain action. And also, if you're purchasing anything, if you're ordering anything, don't click on links. do a Google search for the store that you're interested in purchasing from, and then make the purchase through that way. Be aware of special offers. We see many individuals falling for COVID-19 related attacks and themes. So be very careful of that. There's no $150 vaccines for COVID-19 that exists right now. So please don't fall for that. And of course, with our checkpoints endpoint product, we can protect against all these things, right? So make sure whatever security solution it is that you're going to deploy, make sure that it has been independently tested and verified that it can protect against the threats that we are seeing today.
Okay, so you mentioned quite a couple of, or a number of things there, right? But just thinking about, I'm in a home environment. I guess, I'm probably accessing my home Wi-Fi. I might be using my mobile and the data on that piece. What are some of the attacks that I'm likely? You mentioned ransomware. Mm-hmm. What other points should I be looking for?
Sure. So on mobile phones, the main attacks that we're seeing is malicious applications. Users unknowingly download applications that they don't realize who's actually the author of that application, who's behind that, and then unknowingly or accidentally, or not realizing the amount of access that they're giving that application onto their phone. So then they become victims of being spied upon, or attackers are able to listen in on conversations, take screen captures, record conversations, those sorts of attacks. We're seeing attacks that are pretty much based around that. And also, you mentioned using Wi-Fi as well. So another thing to be concerned about is IoT security, right? That is something we believe in the coming years. We've already seen attacks, but we believe this will be there'll be massive attacks launched using IoT devices.
Okay, so IoT devices. Tell me a little bit about that.
Okay, so IoT devices, and I'm talking about basically your routers. It could be smart devices that's been installed inside homes. It could be your digital assistants. It could be your light bulbs. Anything basically that's connected these days. We're seeing a trend that attackers are able to leverage vulnerabilities within these devices. And the reason for this is that IoT device manufacturers are not security vendors. Their primary focus is making the device as user-friendly and as easy and as simple to use as possible. Security is an afterthought, if at all. And so, based on our research, based on what we've seen in the industry, we know that majority of the IoT devices, the firmware, are inherently vulnerable, meaning that they have security holes that attackers can leverage. In many cases, these IoT devices come with default username and password, for example. And if you don't change that, then those passwords are available to attackers. And even if the password is complex, if you don't change it, there's a pretty good chance that attackers have those passwords. We've seen devices that have hard-coded IP addresses that nobody seems to know who they belong to. And in some cases, we've identified those IP addresses and attributed it to a command and control service. So basically, these are sorts of threats that users need to be very, very aware of.
Okay. I've heard the term man in the middle. Mm-hmm. Can you maybe just share with us what that means and how does that potentially impact my business?
Sure. So man in the middle attack is basically when an attacker is intercepting the flow of communication between say an end user and a service that they're consuming. So let's say I'm sitting at home and I don't know, maybe I'm checking my email or I'm checking my banking details. So when I log in to my service, there's the flow of the traffic is intercepted by an attacker, and they are able to then look inside. By doing what we call SSL interception, they're able to actually, basically what they do is they create two complete different sessions. So the end user believes that they're communicating with their bank, and the bank thinks that they're communicating with the end user, but they're both actually communicating with the attacker who's sitting in the middle and looking at the traffic as it's flowing through. That's what a man in the middle attack is.
Okay, yeah, it's an interesting part because I had a customer share with me that they potentially, the email came about a change of account details, and they almost sent it through, with quite a substantial amount. So it sounds like it's a sort of preeminent threat that's sort of starting to develop more and more.
So what you're talking about there is more like what we call business email compromise, or BEC,
Okay.
or the other name for that is whaling. This is where attackers go after some of the important people in the business, typically people who have who make transaction details, decisions or financial decisions, and then try and fool them into making transactions to accounts or to invoices where the account details have been updated and the actual account details belong to the attackers themselves. So we've seen many of those attacks as well.
Wow, it's a huge variety of potential threats, Absolutely. Isn't it? So when you think about it from a small business operators viewpoint, without too much complexity, tell me a little bit around then how does the Checkpoint product suite help protect my business? So what does it actually do in order to prevent some of these attacks?
Sure. So Checkpoint can protect your network, as well as your endpoint, as well as your mobile phones, as well as your IoT devices and your cloud infrastructure, right? So we can protect all of that. And every one of these different environments have different challenges. They have what we call different attack vectors. And we cover pretty much all of those attack vectors. So in the network space, is basically where you can have a Checkpoint appliance. For a small business, the form factor is quite small. It's what we call a desktop form factor, and we've got many range of these appliances. So these appliances, when deployed in your environment, will block threats at the network level. And we look at lots of different types of attacks. Some attacks look to leverage vulnerabilities. Some attacks look to send you malware. Some attacks try and get your endpoints to talk to command and control servers. These are machines that are owned by attackers. So these are all different types of attacks, and Checkpoint's network security solution addresses those sorts of threats. On the endpoint, we address threats like ransomware, cryptojacking, crypto mining, phishing attacks. All of these types of modern attacks are what we help protect against. On your mobile phones, we protect against malicious applications, SMS phishing, which is very similar to phishing, but you're just basically getting the phishing attack on your SMS. So those sorts of attacks, man-in-the-middle attack, as we spoke about earlier, we can certainly protect against those sorts of threats.
Okay.
In the cloud, it's a completely different challenge, and again, there are various different challenges in the cloud, and we address many of those challenges in the cloud as well. And the same thing applies to IoT as well.
One of the regular concerns, that I hear is around. So how do you protect it up front before the attack occurs, right? Because one of the challenges or concerns there is if once I'm hacked, it's done. I'm impacted, right? So how does the Checkpoint product actually protect me before it happens?
Sure. So the Checkpoint mindset is that we've got to focus on prevention, right? And you're absolutely right. You've got to focus on prevention rather than detection only. In some cases where you need to rely on detection, you've got to have tools that can automatically remediate. You can't rely on manual remediation. So our philosophy, our approach is all about prevention. But if we can prevent the attack, it allows us to be one step ahead of the attacker. Then that's the name of the game, right? It is prevention, not just detection.
Okay. Just, I guess, finally, if I walk away from today and, I don't have anything in place to, protect my business, I've got a number of workers, at home using their mobiles, their Wi-Fi, their laptops. What would be the first thing that you could encourage or suggest that I do in order to start protecting my devices?
So again, this is an interesting question because there isn't just one thing that there's a lot of things you've got to do in that scenario. I would start with a security awareness training. Make sure my employees, everybody in my organization, understand the latest threats and trends and the scams that are going on. So that's the first thing I would do. The second thing I would do is make sure that all my IT systems are patched and updated with the latest software. Those are two of the most important things. Third thing, identify any end of life or end of support software and systems and make sure I'm aware of the risks associated with that. And if the risk is too high, then get rid of those. I would recommend not using or reusing the same password. Do not reuse the same password ever. right? So leverage password managers so that you've got more complex passwords, as well as you're not reusing passwords. Where possible, use multi-factor authentication. The other thing I would recommend is making sure that your staff understand that that they shouldn't be clicking on links blindly, right? Don't open emails from unknown senders and click on links or documents. Those are things that I would recommend.
No worries.
And finally, I would also say that make sure you don't post too much information on social media, because those things can be used against you in social engineering attacks.
Okay. Well, Ashwin, thank you very much for your time today. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.